What's the scariest theory known to man? Story 1. Quantum suicide, quantum immortality. The idea that we never really die in our perspective. Every time we encounter a situation where we may die, we continue on in a parallel universe where something happens that prevents our death. But we die in the original universe. In a sense, our consciousness lives on by transferring itself to a parallel universe where we continue to exist. Story 2. Everything that humanity has ever accomplished beyond basic survival has been motivated by a fundamental and irreducible fear of non-existence. Our conception of self and self-esteem generally is simply a buffer against the anxiety that comes with recognizing that we will cease to be. Culture is just a massive shared delusion to mitigate our fear of the unknown and ultimately of death. Thus, we want to imagine certain works of art as timeless or to place value in family lines and offspring, to project ourselves beyond death. We take comfort in our value systems and the structures that arise from them, whether that's through conceptions of biological kinship, national, political identity, religious faith, etc. This includes belief in the inherent value of ensuring the future of humanity through scientific progress. Indeed, much of modern Western life is devoted to the avoidance of death, the various euphemisms and stock phrases in mourning, the entire funeral home industry that serves to remove death from the ordinary course of life, from the home and onto the embalming table or into the crematorium. We build up the artifice to avoid the brutal reality. Story 3. Anesthesia. The thing is, we don't really know how it works. All we know is that it A paralyzes us. B stops us responding to pain. C stops us forming new memories. D knocks us unconscious. E blocks pain. But we also know that sometimes it goes wrong, and many people have experienced being trapped in the ultimate nightmare. They get that and nothing else. Imagine being conscious during an operation, feeling everything, every cut of the knife, every prod and poke, being in completely excruciating agony, but being completely paralyzed, unable to tell anyone anything, just lying there, screaming in your head, a prisoner in your own body. To the outside observer, of course, it will look like the anesthetic has worked perfectly. There's no observable response to pain. The only way you can know it hasn't worked is by talking to the patient later, because in these known cases, the amnesiac effects have also failed to work. But what if they did work? How would you ever know then? There's another theory that states that, given we don't really know how anesthetics work, maybe this happens to everyone under anesthetic. But normally when they work, they just block us from forming new memories, so we just never remember our horrific, nightmarish experience. On the other hand, for about 100 years, doctors confidently believed that babies didn't really feel pain, and would regularly perform major operations without any anesthesia other than muscle relaxant. There was an idea that even if they did feel pain, they wouldn't remember it anyway, so it didn't matter. This only changed in the mid-1980s. Story 4. Solipsism equals the view or theory that the self is all that can be known to exist. Basically, the only thing that you're sure of is that you exist. How do you know that other people are actually conscious, real, and alive? How do you know that the world you live in actually exists? Since your mind is the only sure thing to exist, it's possible that everyone else and everything else are just projections from your own consciousness. Living your day-to-day life requires that you assume other people are real and everything else is real. On Wikipedia, it says assuming that there is a universe independent of an agent's mind and knowable only through the agent's senses. How is the existence of this independent universe to be scientifically studied? If a person sets up a camera to photograph the moon when he is not looking at it, then at best he determines that there is an image of the moon in the camera when he eventually looks at it. Logically, this does not assure that the moon itself or even the camera existed at the time the photograph is supposed to have been taken. To establish that it is an image of an independent moon requires many other assumptions that amount to begging the question. We just assume that we live in a real, physical world and that everyone else is real as well. However, there is no way to test this. All you can be sure of is that you exist. Story 5. If you get deep into particle physics, you start to realize that there really is no such thing as solid matter. Everything in the universe appears to be built upon waves of vibrating energy, and if you look deep enough at anything, there's really nothing there, at all, and we don't actually exist as matter in space-time in the way you think we do. This concept supports a smorgasbord of fantastical theories. The idea we live in a simulation. The idea that there's actually a god of some sort. The idea there's multiple universes, some say an infinite number of them, or any number of other interesting ideas. Story 6. The Great Filter. It's a theory about why the universe seems so filled with potential for life and yet we haven't found it. It states that somewhere between pre-life and an advanced civilization capable of colonizing the stars, there's a great filter that stops them and ends life. This means humans fit into one of these three scenarios. A, we're rare, meaning we've already passed the great filter, unlike other civilizations on other planets. B, we're the first, meaning conditions in the universe are only now life-friendly, and we're among many on our way to the capability of colonization. C, we haven't hit the filter yet, meaning we're going to die. If this one is true, it means finding life or proof of life on Mars or Europa would be awful news because it would almost certainly mean the filter is still ahead of us instead of behind us. Story 7. that you will forever relive your own life. It does make a lot of sense because once you die you don't belong anywhere, not space or time, and you always exist during the time you were alive, so you might just be constantly experiencing it all. Even if your life is good, it is pretty horrible to know that all that you learn will disappear, and every mistake you do anything to take back will be repeated and experienced over and over. But think of most lives and it gets infinitely worse. And then those that were extraordinarily horrible. Talk about unfair. Story 8. The universe is a false vacuum. This is, in short, a theoretical scientific hypothesis that our universe is actually in a false phase state as part of a larger universe. Like if it were in a temporary thing, think the real universe is a pot of boiling water, and we are just within a bubble forming at the bottom of the pot. Eventually, however, that false vacuum has to pop, yes, even after billions of years in this false state. And we and everything we know in our visible universe will disappear in an instant with no warning whatsoever, and there's nothing you can do about it. Story 9. The Phantom Time Hypothesis. The Phantom Time Hypothesis is a historical conspiracy theory advanced by German historian and publisher Herbert Illig, born 1947, which proposes that the year 613 was followed by the year 911 and that historical events between AD 614 and 911 in the early Middle Ages of Europe and neighboring regions are either wrongly dated or did not occur at all, and that there has been a systematic effort to cover up that fact. The hypothesis suggests a conspiracy by the Holy Roman Emperor Otto II, Pope Sylvester II, and possibly the Byzantine Emperor Constantine VII to fabricate a dating system that placed them at the special year of AD 1000, and to rewrite history, inventing the heroic figure of Charlemagne among other things. Story 10. Determinism, which in short says you have no free will. Every aspect of the world operates according to specific natural laws. There is a direct cause for any effect, and by knowing the relationship between them and the environment, you can know the results. If you throw a ball up, it will come down. If we had perfect information about the ball and its environment, we could predict exactly, to the atom, where it would land as it stands. We are pretty freakishly good at it anyway. What then of humans? Unless you believe in the spirit, soul divided by etc. that is detached from the causal chain, that is to say something immaterial. The modern understanding of the human body is that we are purely physical systems acting in accordance with natural laws. I wrote this because some sets of neurons in my brain generated these words in response to being triggered by some protein elsewhere, and my own history, and the fact that I like to share information. I had no say in any of this according to determinism. If an observer had perfect information about the whole universe and its laws, they could, without question, not only have known that I was going to write this but also what words I would write, which ones I rewrote, and the edits I will make tomorrow, because everything follows a strict sequence of cause and effect. I had no more choice in writing this than you did in reading it. What happened happened and could have happened no other way. Story 11. Eternal hell. It's literally the worst thing any human can imagine, that by being a bad person you will be condemned to torture for an infinite amount of time. You might be able to reason that it's justifiable to be tortured for as long as you lived or some algorithm related to such, but eternity is overkill for the sins committed during an unimaginably minute sliver of time. Story 12. Eternal anything. Think about it. Let's say you spend a couple years doing what you enjoy most. I don't know, amazing breakfast, go for a swim, maybe a hike in some incredible landscape like New Zealand, drinks at sunset with all your loved ones, great devil's tango with the man, woman of your dreams, etc., you name it. Now, imagine doing that for a few decades, and then for a century, and then a few centuries. Now it's, say, 25 years later. You are now in hell. This is where I imagine I would be begging for any sort of end. By this time, I might even seek out torture because at least it would be something new. Then 1,000,000 years pass, then 1,000,000,000, then 1,000,000,000,000. Who knows, because time ceases to have any meaning after a few hundred years. Now this is eternity, so you may as well be on day one, because the same amount of time stretches before you as it did 1,000,000,000,000 years earlier. You're Marvin the paranoid android moving in a clockwise circle, and then maybe every few million years you mix it up and move counterclockwise. Absolutely anything, pleasurable or painful, becomes unimaginable torture after enough time has passed. So the scariest theory, that there is an afterlife ... and it is eternal. Story 13. The constant march of technology, given enough time, will eventually lead to the creation of computers powerful enough to simulate reality perfectly. Once this technology level is reached, a given society will create more and more perfect simulations of reality. The life in those simulations will eventually grow to the point where they will be able to create their own simulations. The life in those simulations will eventually grow to the point where they will be able to create their own simulations. This process will continue for every layer of simulations, effectively creating infinite simulations to one reality. Story 14. There's the notion that if time travel were ever going to be possible in the future, that there would already be people here in our present that are time travelers from the future. Would any of you, personally, reveal to others that you're from the future? Why hasn't anyone gone back further into time to fix the horrors of your, e.g., WWII. There are people here from the future, but they understand things of the world and science so as to not interfere, meaning they know better than to change the past, because it can't be undone. Or better yet, history as we know it was the lesser of two evils. It's impossible to travel back in time, but not into the future. Special relativity, gravitational, velocity dilation of time. With so many unknowns, who wants a one-way ticket out of here? Not really fitting into the scary aspect of a theory, but along the lines of being punished now for things we have or haven't done in the future. I don't like the idea that time travel is a one-way trip. I guess it really just trips me out more than anything. Story 15. The theory of an interdimensional being. It says that there are beings that exist, live beyond our 3 dimensions, in a 5th, 6th, 7th, etc. dimension. The creepy thing about it is, it can see us in our 3 dimensions, while we can't. Much like we can see a stick figure on a piece of paper, we can interact with it, see it, we can even touch it. However, the stickman can't see us and doesn't know we're there unless we entered its dimension by sticking our finger through the paper. That means there could be an alien looking at you right now, everywhere, anytime, and you would never know unless the alien wanted you to. Story 16. Boltzmann brains. Boltzmann says that the universe should be a great deal more chaotic than we see it, and life doesn't strive in chaos. So how can we exist? How is it that we see a relatively well-organized huge observable universe? Boltzmann's argument is that any sort of structure of matter could pop into existence randomly in an infinite universe, including a low-entropy region the size of our observable universe, in which intelligent creatures could evolve and marvel at their ridiculous unlikeliness. Other things that could pop into existence randomly are fully formed brains complete with memories, Boltzmann brains. Boltzmann's paradox states that the odds of fully formed brains appearing out of the chaos are so much better than the odds of low-entropy structures of sufficient size to allow for brains to evolve, and consequently far more of these Boltzmann brains exist in an infinite universe than evolved brains. It is therefore far more likely that you popped into existence a nanosecond ago complete with all of your memories than that you lived the life that you remember as a member of an evolved species. In fact, you probably haven't had any actual experiences yet. You reading this post is just your brain processing neural impulses that you popped into existence with. Story 17. Probably not the scariest at first, but the butterfly effect. Basically, go back in time and make a small, seemingly insignificant change, which often happens just by arriving in that time. By making that small change, an entire new timeline is created that is followed, and many of us will have idea that someone changed the timelines until we pop open a history book and find out that Hitler never became Germany's leader. He became an architectural artist, or that instead of the colonies winning the Revolutionary War, Britain did. It gets depressing when you realize that, for all we know, we're on an alternate timeline caused by a butterfly effect. We will never know what that other timeline is like, and if we try, we'll just create another effect, making the problem worse. Story 18. There is a chance the universe could be destroyed any second due to a phase transition. This is just like the phase changes of normal matter. Take water for example. When the water phase transitions, it becomes ice. Well, the same thing can happen to the universe. At any point, empty space can enter a phase transition. The point in space where this occurs is destroyed and reborn into a new universe with different laws of physics. This new universe will literally destroy our universe from the inside out. We know it can happen because it already has. A few Planck times after the Big Bang, the universe lost enough energy to enter a phase transition. The phase transition that occurred in this instant was actually the universe we live in taking shape. Before this, there was a completely different universe with completely different laws of physics. Kinda terrifying to think that empty space can kill you and destroy everything we know whenever it wants to. Story 19. Higher dimensional beings. Imagine if there was a 2D person. If you stare at them a certain way, they can't see you. All you have to do is look from a top view and they won't know you are there, and they would never know. Living their life as 2D, they would never be able to comprehend how something could be looking down on them. Now imagine a 4D person. They could be looking at you from a 4-dimensional angle, an angle that you will never understand. They could be right beside you, but you wouldn't know, and you would never know. Just as we could interact with the 2D person, the 4D person could interact with us. But as long as they don't want us to, we could never interact with them or not even know of them. Story 20. Kessler syndrome, low Earth orbit, an area of outer space around Earth that encloses all orbits below 2,000 kilometers, is the home of the International Space Station, and of other thousands of satellites. It is also becoming a hazardous arena littered with mindless space junk and inoperable spacecraft orbiting at outrageous speeds. The Kessler syndrome is a theory proposed by NASA scientist Donald J. Kessler in 1978, used to describe a self-sustaining cascading collision of space debris in low Earth orbit. It's the idea that two colliding objects in space generate more debris that then collides with other objects, creating even more shrapnel and litter until the entirety of LEO is an impassable array of super swift stuff. At that point, any entering satellite would face unprecedented risks of headfirst bombardment. The cloud of debris could last for centuries or more, and the more satellites we launch, the more likely it is to happen. This could effectively make launching satellites or any manned craft intended for extended stays in space impossible, sending us into a sort of dark age again. Story 21. It wasn't until around the year 1800 that humanity reached a population of 1 billion after thousands and thousands of years. In the 215 years since then, the world population has increased to about 7.2 billion. That exponential growth has very large and long-lasting negative effects on our planet, and will continue to do so until we reach carrying capacity and die off. Edit, I'll expand on human population a little more. Most modern scientists have the human species being around 200,000 years old based on fossil records. Around the year 1800 is when the human population first hit 1 billion. That means it took about 198,200 years to reach that number. Human population hit 2 billion around 1927. Human population hit 3 billion around 1959. Human population hit 4 billion in 1974, 5 billion in 1987, 6 billion in 1999, and 7 billion in 2012. It's at the point where we are growing by 1 billion people nearly every 12-13 years. That is not very sustainable for a long period of time no matter how you look at it. Especially with the modernization of third world countries. With the development of those countries comes increased life expectancy and lower birth rates with access to medicine, education, housing, and sanitation. So with that you say okay, the birth rate decreases, but life expectancy increases. What does that mean? That still results in more people being born than people dying, thus still net population gain. And not only is that net gain, but that is net gain for people who live longer. So that means about 11 billion people, obviously not all 11 billion in reality, projected in 2100 will live longer and die less often while still the population increases. I am definitely not an expert on population growth and resource usage by humans, but it definitely is not a good outlook overall. Then we get to the actual problem, limited resources on Earth. The population now alone overconsumes. What will happen when we have reached the 10-11 billion mark? We are slowly killing our own species, and the species around us, as we have to increase our consumption every year to account for our population growth and extended life expectancies. To put it simply, it takes Earth 18 months or so to produce the ecological services humanity uses in 1 year with 7.2 billion people. What will happen when the population reaches 11 billion? It's not a matter of if we run out of resources due to population and consumption, it's when. Story 22. I'm glad there's a name for this. I've believed this to be true for as long as I can remember. I've always thought that human beings are unique to known species in that we possess both the desire to continue existing and the consciousness to confront the fact that we won't at some point. So many behaviors make sense when you look at it from this perspective. People are constantly looking to find some bit of immortality to help to reconcile this issue. Be it religious belief, fame, children, etc. So much of what humanity does makes a lot of sense if you just attribute it to a constant existential terror. Maybe it's just overfitting my own subjective experience to the whole of humanity, but it's the only way I can rationalize why I feel a drive to succeed in a career or relate to other people. It's just to somehow leave an imprint on the universe before I fade into oblivion. Story 23. That you will forever relive your own life. It does make a lot of sense because once you die you don't belong anywhere, not space or time, and you always exist during the time you were alive, so you might just be constantly experiencing it all. Even if your life is good, it is pretty horrible to know that all that you learn will disappear, and every mistake you do anything to take back will be repeated and experienced over and over. But think of most lives and it gets infinitely worse. And then those that were extraordinarily horrible. Talk about unfairness. Story 24. Arguably you are a completely different person every single day when you wake up in the morning. You have the memories and possessions of the person who was alive the day before. You mostly have the same brain, but not quite exactly, and your body is a little different too. Now extend this a little further and you are really a different person every hour, every minute, etc. You are constantly changing. It's like the parable of the man who replaced one plank of his ship, then another and another, until he had replaced the entire boat. Clearly he no longer has his original boat, but when did that happen exactly? Arguably, it happened as soon as he replaced the first plank. Story 25. In philosophy invoking physics and biology, that is determinism, which in short says you have no free will. Every aspect of the world operates according to specific natural laws. There is a direct cause for any effect, and by knowing the relationship between them and the environment, you can know the results. If you throw a ball up, it will come down. If we had perfect information about the ball and its environment, we could predict exactly, to the atom, where it would land. As it stands, we are pretty freakishly good at it anyway. What then of humans? Unless you believe in the spirit, soul divided by etc. that is detached from the causal chain, that is to say something immaterial. The modern understanding of the human body is that we are purely physical systems acting in accordance with natural laws. I wrote this because some sets of neurons in my brain generated these words in response to being triggered by some protein elsewhere, and my own history, and the fact that I like to share information. I had no say in any of this according to determinism. If an observer had perfect information about the whole universe and its laws, they could, without question, not only have known that I was going to write this but also what words I would write, which ones I rewrote, and the edits I will make tomorrow, because everything follows a strict sequence of cause and effect. I had no more choice in writing this than you did in reading it. What happened happened and could have happened no other way. Story 26. The afterlife is a pre-death hallucination. I mean, heaven or hell could be the last thoughts of your brain, having subconsciously been formed and created over years of life, and then sent to your main brain before the moment of brain death. You could still be perceiving this thought for what feels like minutes to an hour. Then, nothing. I mean, I know how this sounds, but have you ever actually died? It tends to be a one-way trip, and those who came back say they saw the spiritual visions that had been spoon-fed to them all their lives. And most of them only stayed clinically dead for an hour, tops. Death in itself is terrifying, acting as an ultimate curtain, a barrier beyond which few have come back from, and remains one of the few things we can honestly call a mystery.